She was on her hands and knees scrubbing the marble floors of the penthouse when she first saw him. The penthouse belonged to one of the wealthiest men in Moscow, a billionaire named Dmitry Volkov, and she was one of dozens of cleaning women who came through that space every week. She wasn't supposed to notice him. She wasn't supposed to look at him. She was supposed to be invisible, which is what cleaning women are trained to be. But there was something about the way he moved through the space, something about the way he looked at the city through those floor-to-ceiling windows, that made her unable to look away. Before we start this story, I need you to do something for me. Leave a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. And at the very end of the story, I need you to rate it from 0 to 10. Because this is not just a story about love. This is a story about what happens when a woman has nothing but faith, when a man is willing to risk everything for her, and when a mother's prejudice meets the kind of love that can't be destroyed by money or status. This is the story of Katia Volkova, Dmitry Volkov, and the moment when a cleaning lady asked for the one thing that would prove everything. Let's find out what he was willing to do. Katia had been cleaning offices in Moscow for 7 years. 7 years of arriving at 5 in the morning before anyone else came to work. 7 years of pushing a cart filled with cleaning supplies through hallways that belonged to people who would never notice her. 7 years of making minimum wage, of living in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, of eating simple meals and wearing the same uniform every single day. She was 29 years old, though she looked older because the work aged you. Her hands were rough from chemicals. Her back ached constantly from bending over. Her knees were permanently damaged from kneeling on hard floors. But her eyes were still bright. Her eyes still held something that the work hadn't managed to destroy yet. Dmitry Volkov owned one of the largest technology companies in Russia. He was 38 years old, born into wealth, educated at Cambridge and Stanford, and he had a reputation for being both brilliant and utterly disconnected from normal human interaction. He was the kind of rich man who barely seemed to notice that money existed. He would leave $1,000 items on his desk and forget about them. He would order expensive meals and barely taste them. Money had lost all meaning to him, which meant he had the freedom to focus on things that actually mattered, like building technology that changed how people communicated. The penthouse was his workspace as much as it was his home. He slept there sometimes. He worked there most nights. And that's where he first saw Katia. It happened on a Thursday evening in October. Most of the staff had left for the day. Dmitry was standing at the windows looking out at Moscow at dusk, when the city turned into something almost beautiful, when the lights began to twinkle and the chaos of the day transformed into something manageable. He heard the sound of a mop moving across the floor. He turned, and there she was. A woman with dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing a gray uniform, moving methodically across the white marble floors. She didn't see him at first. She was focused on her work. But when she finally noticed him standing there, she froze. "Continue," he said in Russian, his voice gentle. "Don't stop because I'm here." Katia hesitated. This wasn't protocol. The rich men weren't supposed to interact with the cleaning staff. There was a hierarchy. There were rules. But something in his expression suggested that he wasn't like the other men who'd worked in this building. He was watching her with genuine curiosity, as if she was a person worth looking at. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her accent suggesting she was from somewhere outside Moscow, somewhere smaller, somewhere less important. "I can come back later." "What's your name?" he asked, ignoring her suggestion. "Katia," she answered. "Katia Volkova." "Katia," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt in his mouth. "That's a strong name. A name for someone who does difficult work and doesn't complain about it. Do you like working here?" The question was so unexpected that Katia didn't know how to answer it. Did she like working there? Nobody had ever asked her that before. "It's work," she said finally. "Work is work. Some days are better than others." Dmitry smiled slightly. "That's the most honest answer I've heard in months," he said. "Everyone else in my life is either trying to impress me or trying to get something from me. You're just trying to do your job. That's refreshing." He didn't speak to her again that evening. He moved back to the windows and continued looking out at the city. Katia finished her work and left, thinking that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The next week he was there again. And the week after that. And slowly, without either of them planning it, a pattern emerged. Katia would come to clean the penthouse. Dmitry would appear and they would talk. Not about anything significant. They talked about Moscow. They talked about the weather. They talked about books they'd read and movies they'd seen. They talked about the things that ordinary people talk about when they're getting to know each other. And then, very gradually, they started talking about the things that mattered. Dmitri told her about his childhood, about a father who'd built an empire through ruthlessness and manipulation, about a mother who'd spent her life obsessing over status and reputation. He told her about the loneliness of being rich, about having everything except the thing he actually wanted, which was genuine human connection. He told her about the women he'd dated, all of them after his money, all of them willing to leave the moment someone richer came along. Katya told him about her childhood in a small town near Novosibirsk. She told him about her parents, who'd run a small cafe. She told him about coming to Moscow to find work and discovering that the city was colder than any winter. She told him about the dream she'd had of becoming a lawyer, a dream that had died the moment she realized her family didn't have money for university. She told him about accepting that life wasn't going to be what she'd imagined, and about learning to be grateful for work instead of bitter about limitations. 3 months into their friendship, Dmitri did something that surprised her. He asked her to come to dinner. Not to cook for him. To have dinner with him. As his date. Katya hesitated. She understood the implications. She understood that if they were seen together, people would talk. She understood that a man like him, a billionaire, shouldn't be dating a cleaning woman. But she also understood that she'd fallen in love with him, and that sometimes love requires you to ignore what society thinks is appropriate. Yes, she said. I'll have dinner with you. The relationship that followed was beautiful and complicated in ways that neither of them had anticipated. Dmitri wanted to shower her with gifts. He wanted to buy her expensive clothes and jewelry. He wanted to transform her life into something that matched his own. But Katya resisted. She didn't want to be transformed. She wanted to be loved exactly as she was. Take the gifts, Dmitri would say, frustrated. I don't want gifts, Katya would respond. I want you to see me. Just see me. And he did. He saw her. He saw her strength in continuing to work even though she didn't have to anymore. He saw her intelligence in the way she analyzed problems. He saw her goodness in the way she treated people, even people who treated her poorly. He saw her and he loved her, completely and without reservation. But there was one person who didn't see her that way. Dmitri's mother, Alexandra Volkova, was a woman of 65 years old who'd spent her entire life believing that status and reputation were more important than anything else. She'd married a ruthless man and she'd produced a brilliant son, and she'd always believed that her son would eventually marry someone appropriate. Someone from a good family. Someone with money. Someone who would understand the responsibilities that came with being part of the Volkov dynasty. When Dmitri told his mother that he was dating a cleaning woman, her reaction was immediate and brutal. You're insane, she said, her voice cold enough to freeze the room. You're throwing away everything your father built. You're destroying your reputation. People will laugh at you. People will think you've lost your mind. I love her, Dmitri said simply. Love, his mother spat the word like it was poison. Love is what poor people have because they have nothing else. Love is what people who don't have money use to justify their pathetic lives. You have money, Dmitri. You have options. And you're choosing a woman who cleans other people's toilets. Do you understand how humiliating that is? Do you understand what people will say about our family? I don't care what people say, Dmitri replied. You should, his mother said coldly. Because I certainly do. From that point forward, Alexandra made it clear that she would never accept Katya. She refused to meet her. She told Dmitri that if he continued the relationship, she would disown him. She enlisted family members to pressure him to end things. She spread rumors through Moscow's high society that Katya was a gold digger who'd seduced her son. Katya offered to end the relationship. She understood the cost that her presence was extracting from him. She was willing to walk away. No, Dmitri said firmly. I'm not losing you because my mother is a snob. I'm not choosing my mother's approval over my own life. But the situation continued to deteriorate. Alexandra became more aggressive in her opposition. She threatened to transfer her share of the family company to other family members. She threatened to cut Dmitri out of his trust fund. She made it clear that the cost of being with Katya would be everything. It was during one of these heated conversations that Alexandra made a demand that changed everything. If you want my blessing, she said to Dmitri, you need to prove that you're serious. You need to prove that this isn't just some passing infatuation. You need to prove to me that she's worth destroying your entire family over. What kind of proof? Dmitri asked, though he probably should have known better. Marry her, his mother said. Marry her today. Tonight. Right now. I want to see it. I want to see you sign a prenuptial agreement that protects the family assets. I want to see you commit to this woman in the most binding way possible. And then we'll see if you still think it's worth it when the reality of it hits you." Dmitri looked at his mother for a long moment. He understood what she was doing. She was certain that he would refuse, that he would realize the commitment was too much, that he would eventually come to his senses. She was setting what she thought was an impossible condition, betting that he would back down. But she didn't understand her son at all. 2 hours later, Dmitri was standing outside of Katya's apartment. She lived in a small one-bedroom place in a neighborhood that most wealthy Muscovites would never visit. The building was old. The elevator was broken. The walls needed paint. It was exactly the kind of place that Alexandra would have used as proof that Katya was beneath the family. "Will you marry me?" Dmitri asked, standing in her small living room, not on one knee, not with a ring, just standing there as if the enormity of what he was asking didn't matter. Because to him it didn't. What mattered was that he wanted to spend his life with this woman, and he wanted to do it right now. Katya stared at him. "Your mother asked you to do this," she said, understanding immediately. "Yes," Dmitri admitted. "But she asked because she thought I would refuse. She thought I would realize that I couldn't actually commit to you. She thought this would scare me away." "And it doesn't?" Katya asked. "Nothing scares me away from you," Dmitri said. "So yes, I'll marry you. Tonight, if possible. Tomorrow, if not. But I'm marrying you, Katya. I'm making you my wife." Katya cried. Not tears of joy exactly, but tears that acknowledged the weight of what he was doing. He was destroying his relationship with his mother. He was risking his inheritance. He was walking away from everything he'd been born into. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I want to. I want to choose you, completely and without reservation. I want to prove to my mother that you're worth more than any of the things she thinks matter." They were married the next day in a small courthouse with a judge and 2 witnesses they'd met outside the building. There was no white dress. There was no expensive reception. There was just Dmitri and Katya, signing papers that bound them together legally and emotionally. When Dmitri called his mother to tell her that it was done, that he'd actually married Katya, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "I gave you an out," his mother said finally. "I assumed you were smart enough to take it." "You gave me a test," Dmitri corrected. "And I passed it. I married her because I love her, and that love is worth more to me than anything you can threaten me with." "Then you've made your choice," his mother said coldly. "Don't expect me to accept this. Don't expect me to welcome her into the family. And don't expect me to help you when this inevitably falls apart." But it didn't fall apart. What happened instead was something that Alexandra hadn't anticipated. What happened was that Dmitri took his new wife and he showed her the world. He took her to Paris and to Barcelona and to Tokyo. He took her to places where her past as a cleaning woman didn't matter because she was simply Katya, a woman worth knowing. He also did something else. He gave her the opportunity to go back to university. He paid for her to attend law school. She studied at night while working during the day, exactly as she'd once dreamed of doing. And 4 years later she graduated. She became a lawyer. But more than that, she became someone who used her law degree to help people like her. People who'd been trapped by poverty and circumstance. She opened a small legal practice that served communities that large law firms ignored. She became famous, not because of her husband's money, but because of her own brilliance and her own dedication to justice. It was this work that eventually brought Alexandra face to face with the reality of who her daughter-in-law actually was. A young woman came to Katya's office. She was a cleaning worker, like Katya had been. She'd been exploited by her employer, who'd refused to pay her for months of work. The woman had nowhere to go. She had no legal representation. She was about to be evicted from her apartment. She came to Katya because she'd heard that there was a lawyer who understood what it was like to be invisible. Katya took the case. She worked 18-hour days preparing documents. She built an airtight legal argument. She walked into court and she demolished the employer's defense. She won the case. The young woman was awarded back pay and damages. She had enough money to secure housing. She had a future. The case made headlines. And in one of those headlines, Katya's background was mentioned. It said that she'd once worked as a cleaning woman herself. It said that she'd been dismissed by Moscow's elite. It said that she'd become a lawyer despite every obstacle. It said that she was now using her position to help others who'd been exploited the way she had. Alexandra read that article while sitting in her penthouse. And for the first time, she understood what her son had seen in this woman. She understood that Katia wasn't beneath the family. She was actually the most remarkable member of the family. She was someone who'd taken nothing and transformed it into something meaningful. She was someone who used her advantages to help others instead of just accumulating more advantages. Alexandra called Dmitri. "I want to meet with your wife," she said. It was the first time she'd ever referred to Katia as his wife without contempt. The meeting was awkward and tense. Alexandra came to Katia's small office, which was deliberately modest despite the fact that Dmitri had offered to pay for something larger. Alexandra looked around at the space filled with case files and the photographs of women Katia had helped. And she sat down, and she said something that she'd probably never said to anyone before. "I was wrong," she said. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about my son's choice. And I was wrong about what matters in this world." Katia didn't respond immediately. She was cautious, because she'd been given false hope before. "I read about your case," Alexandra continued. "The cleaning woman who was being exploited. I read that you fought for her without worrying about money or status. I read that you won. And I realized that you're a better person than I am. I realized that my son chose correctly." "I appreciate that," Katia said carefully. "But this doesn't erase the years of rejection. This doesn't erase the things you said about me." "I know," Alexandra replied. "And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking if you would allow me the opportunity to do better. To be the mother-in-law that your husband deserves. To be the grandmother that your children will have. To prove that I can change." It took time. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. But slowly, over months and years, Alexandra became part of Katia and Dmitri's lives. She attended Katia's court cases. She donated money to Katia's legal practice. She told people in Moscow's high society that her daughter-in-law was the most impressive person she knew. By the time Katia and Dmitri had their first child, a daughter they named Olga, Alexandra had become the kind of grandmother who called constantly and wanted to be involved in every aspect of the child's life. She'd transformed from a woman who couldn't accept her son's choice to a woman who understood why that choice had been brilliant. 20 years after they first met in that penthouse, Dmitri and Katia celebrated their anniversary. They threw a party that was attended by hundreds of people. Lawyers and judges. Dmitri's business associates. Cleaning women whose lives Katia had changed. Family members who'd once rejected her. And Alexandra, who stood in the corner looking at her son and daughter-in-law with an expression of profound pride. Someone at the party asked Dmitri what he would have done if his mother had refused to come around. What he would have done if she'd never accepted Katia. "It wouldn't have mattered," he said. "I would have been happy with my wife regardless of my mother's approval. But I'm glad that she eventually understood. I'm glad that she was able to see what I saw from the beginning. Because Katia is the most remarkable person I know. And anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing something truly special." Katia, standing next to him, squeezed his hand. She understood what he'd sacrificed. She understood the cost of his choice. And she understood that it had been worth it, not because he'd eventually won his mother's approval, but because he'd been willing to lose it in order to be with her. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Alexandra pulled Katia aside. "I want to tell you something," she said. "I want to tell you that I'm grateful for your patience with me. I want to tell you that I'm sorry for all the years I wasted being prejudiced. But most of all, I want to tell you that you were right to ask for proof of love. You were right to ask my son to prove that he was serious. Because the proof wasn't in the grand gesture. The proof was in the fact that he was willing to give up everything for you." Katia smiled. "He didn't give up everything," she said. "He gained everything." And that was true. Dmitri hadn't lost his mother. He'd eventually gained her understanding. He hadn't lost his wealth. He'd used it to build a life that was actually meaningful. He hadn't lost his reputation. He'd transformed his reputation from being the cold billionaire heir to being the man who'd chosen love over status. But the transformation that happened after Dmitri's choice wasn't simple or painless. Because in choosing love, he didn't just lose his mother's approval temporarily. He lost something deeper. He lost the version of himself that he'd been constructed to become. Growing up as Dmitri Volkov meant living under constant scrutiny. Every decision was analyzed through the lens of reputation. Every relationship was evaluated based on social standing. Every achievement was measured against the family legacy. His entire identity had been built on the assumption that he would eventually take over the family business empire, marry someone appropriate, and spend his life maintaining and expanding the Volkov name. But when he married Katya, he walked away from all of that. Not consciously at first, but slowly, as the consequences of his choice accumulated, he began to understand what he was actually doing. 6 months after the wedding, his mother made good on her threats. She transferred her share of the family company to Dmitri's cousin, Victor. Victor was everything Alexandra had always wanted Dmitri to be. Ambitious, ruthless, willing to do whatever it took to accumulate more power and money. Victor saw Dmitri's choice as weakness. He saw the marriage to the cleaning woman as a sign that Dmitri had lost his edge. Victor immediately began making changes to the company. He cut corners on safety regulations. He started questionable business practices that skirted the edge of legality. He laid off thousands of workers to increase profit margins. The company that Dmitri's father had built, the company that Dmitri had inherited, was being systematically transformed into something he didn't recognize. Dmitri watched from the outside, and he felt conflicted. Part of him wanted to fight back. Part of him wanted to regain control of the company and undo what Victor was doing. But another part of him, the part that Katya had helped him discover, understood something more important. He understood that he didn't actually want to be that man anymore. He didn't want to spend his life fighting over money and power. He understood that the company, for all its importance to the family, was just money. It was just numbers on a screen. It wasn't real in the way that Katya was real. It wasn't meaningful in the way that their relationship was meaningful. So he made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He publicly announced that he was stepping back from the family business entirely. He said that he had other interests. He said that he wanted to focus on his marriage and on building a life that had actual meaning. The business world reacted with confusion and criticism. Journalists wrote articles asking what was wrong with Dmitri Volkov. Business associates speculated that he'd had a mental breakdown. Family members suggested that Katya had brainwashed him, that she was keeping him isolated, that she was preventing him from fulfilling his potential. None of it was true. But Dmitri didn't bother defending himself. He simply moved forward with his life. What he moved toward was something unexpected. While Katya was studying law, Dmitri was also studying. He was studying technology in ways that had nothing to do with making money. He was studying artificial intelligence and machine learning. He was studying how technology could be used to solve social problems instead of just creating convenience for wealthy people. He started a small company. Not a company designed to make him rich. A company designed to create technology that would help people who didn't have money. He worked with Katya and her clients to understand what technology could help them. He built systems that tracked wage theft. He created platforms that made it easier for workers to report exploitation. He developed apps that connected people with legal resources. It was work that paid almost nothing. It was work that meant Dmitri was no longer a billionaire, at least not in the way that billionaires usually think about being billionaires. His wealth was still there technically, but it wasn't growing anymore. It was being spent on development and on helping people who couldn't afford to pay. When Alexandra found out what he was doing, she was initially horrified. The idea of her son deliberately choosing to make less money seemed insane to her. But as time went on, as she watched Dmitri actually use his talents for something meaningful, she began to understand that he'd found something that she'd spent her entire life searching for and never found. He'd found purpose. 3 years into the marriage, Katya became pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult. She was working as a lawyer during the day and studying for specialized certifications at night. She was managing cases that were emotionally draining. She was helping women who'd been sexually assaulted. She was fighting against powerful men who'd exploited vulnerable people. The stress of the work combined with the physical demands of pregnancy was almost too much. One evening, when Katya was 6 months pregnant, she collapsed in her office. Dmitri found her on the floor. He rushed her to the hospital. The doctors told him that she'd had a partial placental abruption, that the baby was at risk, that she needed to stop working immediately and rest completely. For 3 months, Katya was bedridden. She was devastated. She'd taken on a case involving a young girl who'd been trafficked, and she'd promised that she would see it through to prosecution. Now she was trapped in bed, unable to help, unable to do the work that gave her life meaning. Dmitri sat beside her every single day. He held her hand while she cried with frustration. He listened while she talked about the case, about the girl, about her fears that she was abandoning her clients by taking time off. "You're not abandoning them," Dmitri said. "You're taking care of yourself so that you can continue helping them. This is temporary." But Katya couldn't help feeling that she was failing. She was failing the clients who needed her. She was failing as a lawyer. She was failing at the thing that had become her identity. It was during this period of confinement that Dmitri made another decision that changed their lives. He decided that he would take over Katia's case. Not as a lawyer. He didn't have that qualification. But as a supporter. As an investigator. As someone who could do the legwork that Katia normally did. He spent the next 3 months building a case against the men who'd trafficked the girl. He interviewed witnesses. He collected evidence. He worked with law enforcement. He did everything that Katia would have done if her body hadn't betrayed her. And when the case finally went to trial, Dmitri was there in the courtroom, sitting behind Katia, supporting her as she delivered the prosecution that put the traffickers in prison. The girl was freed. She was given resources to rebuild her life. And Katia understood in that moment what it actually meant to have someone stand beside you completely. It meant sacrifice. It meant showing up even when you had nothing to gain. It meant choosing someone else's victory over your own comfort. Their daughter, Olga, was born 2 weeks after the trial ended. She came into the world with dark eyes and a serious expression that suggested she was already assessing everything around her. Dmitri held her for the first time and he cried. Not sad tears. Tears of recognition. Tears that acknowledged that he'd created this new human, that he was responsible for her, that his choices as a father would shape who she became. Alexandra came to the hospital the day after Olga was born. She brought flowers and gifts. But more importantly, she brought something that she'd never brought to Dmitri's apartment after he married Katia. She brought acceptance. She looked at her granddaughter and she saw something that she'd been too blind to see before. She saw the future. She saw that this child would grow up with parents who loved each other completely. She saw that this child would inherit not money, but values. Not power, but integrity. And she understood that this was actually the greatest inheritance a person could receive. The years that followed were different from anything Dmitri had imagined his life would be. He became a father. He became someone who had to think about school choices and children's safety and the kind of world he was creating for his daughter. He became someone who worked not for power or money, but for the simple satisfaction of helping people. But there was a cost to all of this that nobody had anticipated. There was a cost to Dmitri's choice that went beyond losing his mother's approval or losing control of the family company. 5 years after Olga's birth, Dmitri received a call. His cousin Victor was dead. Victor had been driving his expensive car, driving too fast, driving recklessly the way he always drove, and he'd crashed into a tree. He'd died instantly. There was no mystery about what happened. It was just one more wealthy man making a reckless choice and paying the price. But with Victor's death, something unexpected happened. The family company, which had been destroying itself under Victor's leadership, suddenly fell apart. Without his aggressive direction, without his willingness to cut corners, the company lost major contracts. Investors began to lose confidence. The company that had taken generations to build began to crumble. And Dmitri's mother called him. She called him and she asked him to come back. She asked him to take over the company again. She asked him to save the family legacy. I can't, Dmitri said. I'm not that person anymore. You have to, Alexandra said, her voice desperate. The company is everything. Without it, the family has nothing. Without it, I have nothing. Then I guess you'll have to find something else, Dmitri said, not unkindly. I found something else a long time ago. I found a family that actually matters. I found work that has meaning. I found a life that's real. I'm not going to walk away from that to try to save a company that was destroying me. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Alexandra said something that Dmitri had never heard her say before. I'm afraid, she said. I'm afraid of losing everything. I'm afraid of being nobody. You're not nobody, Dmitri said. You're my mother. You're Olga's grandmother. That means something. That means everything, actually. But you have to learn to value that. You have to learn to see your value in things other than money and status. Alexandra learned slowly. She didn't suddenly transform into a different person. But she began the process of understanding that her son had been right all along. She began to understand that losing everything external could actually be the beginning of gaining something internal. She spent more time with Olga. She taught her granddaughter about history and culture and music. She discovered that her granddaughter was brilliant in ways that went beyond academics. Olga had her mother's sense of justice and her father's analytical mind. She was going to do remarkable things in the world, not because of the money she inherited, but because of the values she learned. But the real crisis came when Katya was 7 years into her legal career. She'd become one of the most respected lawyers in Moscow. She took on cases that other lawyers refused to touch. She fought against corruption and exploitation. She won case after case, changing laws and changing lives. And then she was offered something that would test everything. She was offered a position as a prosecutor in a federal office. It was the kind of position that would make her famous. It was the kind of position that would give her actual power to change systems instead of just fighting individual cases. But accepting the position would mean leaving her private practice. It would mean not being able to help the individual clients who couldn't afford lawyers. It would mean becoming part of the system instead of being outside it, fighting against it. She talked to Dmitry about the decision. They stayed up all night discussing it. "You should take it," Dmitry said. "This is what you've been working toward your entire life." "But what about the people I work with now?" Katya asked. "What about the women who come to my office because they know I'll help them? If I leave, they'll have nobody." "They'll have other lawyers," Dmitry said. "But they won't have me," Katya replied. "They'll have someone who hasn't been where they are. Someone who doesn't understand what it's like to have nothing. Someone who sees them as cases instead of as people." Dmitry was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," Katya said. "I want to help people. I want to change systems. But I also want to help the individual people who come to my door. I want both things and I don't know if I can have both." "Maybe you can," Dmitry said. "Maybe you can find a way to do both. Maybe you don't have to choose between your ambition and your integrity." So Katya did something that surprised everyone. She accepted the position, but she negotiated a part-time arrangement. She would work as a federal prosecutor 3 days a week, and she would continue her private practice 2 days a week. It was unheard of. It was considered impossible. But she did it anyway because she refused to accept the idea that she had to choose between helping individuals and changing systems. 20 years after Dmitry and Katya first met in that penthouse, they were living in a house that was modest by billionaire standards but comfortable in every way that actually mattered. The house had a library filled with books. It had a kitchen where Katya loved to cook. It had a garden where their daughter Olga grew vegetables. It had a workspace where Dmitry developed technology that helped people. The house didn't have marble floors or crystal chandeliers or the kinds of things that Alexandra had once thought mattered. But it had something more valuable. It had love. It had authenticity. It had meaning. Alexandra lived in an apartment nearby now. She'd sold her penthouse. She'd downsized significantly. And she'd discovered something remarkable. She'd discovered that life was actually better when she had less. She had more time for relationships. She had more satisfaction from simple things. She had more peace. She spent her days with Olga and with Katya and Dmitry. She became an advisor to Katya's foundation, which provided legal services to people who couldn't afford them. She became an investor in Dmitry's technology company, not for profit, but because she believed in the work they were doing. But the moment that truly tested everything came when Olga was 15 years old. Olga was brilliant and driven, and she'd inherited both of her parents' sense of justice. She was volunteering at her mother's legal clinic. She was learning about the systems that exploited vulnerable people. And she was becoming radicalized in her commitment to changing those systems. One day, she came home with news that shocked her parents. She said that she didn't want to go to university. She said that she wanted to go to law school early. She said that she wanted to start helping people immediately instead of wasting time on traditional education. Dmitry and Katya looked at their daughter, and they saw themselves reflected back at them. They saw a young woman who was willing to sacrifice conventional paths for what she believed in. They saw a young woman who was making the same kinds of choices they'd made. And they realized that they had to let her make those choices. They couldn't protect her from the consequences of her own decisions. They could only support her and hope that the values they'd instilled in her would guide her. "If this is what you want," Katya said to her daughter, "then we support you. But you need to understand the cost. You need to understand that choosing this path means sacrifice. It means working hard without the guarantee of success. It means sometimes helping people who don't appreciate it." "I know," Olga said. "You taught me that." "Yes," Dmitry said. "We did. And now you have to live it." 30 years after Dmitry first saw Katya cleaning the floors of his penthouse, they were sitting on their porch overlooking Moscow. They were older now. Their hair was graying. Their bodies showed the marks of decades of work and struggle and dedication. but their eyes still held the same light that had first attracted them to each other. "Do you regret it?" Katia asked. "Do you regret giving up everything? Do you regret choosing me instead of your family's legacy?" Dmitri took her hand. "I didn't give up everything," he said. "I gave up things that didn't matter. And I gained things that do. I gained you. I gained our daughter. I gained work that means something. I gained a life that's real. That's not a sacrifice. That's a blessing." "Your mother?" Katia asked. "My mother finally learned to be happy," Dmitri said. "She learned that money and status aren't the same as love and meaning. She learned that she was worthy of being loved for who she was, not for what she had. That's worth more than any legacy." They sat in silence, watching the city lights twinkle as evening fell over Moscow. Somewhere in that city, Olga was working on a case. Somewhere in that city, people whose lives had been changed by Katia's work were living better lives because they'd had access to legal representation. Somewhere in that city, Dmitri's technology was helping workers identify wage theft and exploitation. "I asked you for proof of love," Katia said quietly. "Do you remember? I asked you to prove that you were serious. To prove that I was worth the cost." "I remember," Dmitri said. "You proved it," Katia continued. "You proved it by giving up everything. You proved it by choosing me when it would have been easier to choose your mother's approval. You proved it by being willing to become someone completely different. That was the proof I needed." "No," Dmitri said. "The real proof came later. The real proof was that I didn't regret it. The real proof was that years later, I was still choosing you. That I was still choosing this life. That I was still willing to sacrifice for the things that actually matter." Katia leaned her head on his shoulder. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it. We built a real life." "We did," Dmitri agreed. "And it was worth every moment." Alexandra died in her sleep at the age of 92. She'd been living longer and happier than anyone expected her to be. When they found her, she was smiling. On the bedside table was a photograph of her granddaughter, Olga, accepting an award for her legal work on behalf of trafficking victims. In her will, Alexandra left everything she had to Katia's legal foundation. She left her jewelry to Olga, saying in a note that Olga should wear it with pride, not as a sign of wealth, but as a reminder that even people who seem trapped in systems of status and conformity can find their way to something real. At her funeral, which was attended by hundreds of people, Dmitri stood and spoke. He talked about his mother's transformation. He talked about how she'd learned to value things that couldn't be bought or sold. He talked about how she'd become his greatest supporter in the work that he and Katia were doing. "My mother taught me an important lesson," he said. "She taught me that people can change. She taught me that it's never too late to choose differently. She taught me that love and meaning matter more than legacy and reputation." She lived the second half of her life proving that lesson every single day. 40 years after they first met, Dmitri and Katia received a letter. It was from a woman named Sophia. Sophia had been cleaning offices when Dmitri first saw Katia. Sophia had watched them fall in love. Sophia had watched them choose each other despite the cost. And Sophia had been inspired by their choice. Sophia had gone back to school. Sophia had become a lawyer herself. Sophia had opened a legal clinic in a poor neighborhood. Sophia had helped thousands of people who had no other options. And now Sophia was writing to thank Katia and Dmitri for showing her that it was possible. "I watched what you did," Sophia wrote. "I watched you choose love over status. I watched you choose meaning over money. I watched you build a life that was real. And I thought, if they can do it, maybe I can too. Your choice didn't just change your lives. It changed mine. And because my life changed, I was able to change other people's lives too. Thank you for that." When Katia read that letter, she cried. Not tears of sadness. Tears of vindication. Tears that acknowledged that the choice Dmitri had made 40 years ago had created a ripple effect that was still changing people's lives. So here's what I want to ask you in the comments section. Do you think Dmitri made the right choice? Do you think he should have fought to keep control of the family company? Do you think his mother was right to eventually accept their relationship? Do you think Katia was right to ask for proof of love? And most importantly, do you think that love is worth the cost of losing everything else? Rate this story from 0 to 10. Let me know what you think. And please, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, subscribe now. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Because there are so many stories like this one. So many moments where people have to choose between the comfortable life they were born into and the real life they want to create. So many moments where choosing love means sacrificing everything else. So many moments where that sacrifice turns out to be the best decision they ever made. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.